Mafia boss, married black girl, no one dared to touch. He burst into tears when he learned the reason why. On a stormy night, a ruthless king of the city marries a quiet, guarded woman no one ever dared to touch. Steel doors close. The deal is simple: protection for her sister, obedience for her safety. But the first time danger hits, she moves like a fighter and his cold heart cracks. Why wouldn't anyone touch her? Why does every man look away? In a dark chapel, she lifts her chin and reveals the truth he was never meant to see. A mark cut into her own skin, a lie she carved to survive a monster. The boss, feared by all, drops his gaze and his voice breaks. Tears, rage, a vow. Nobody hurts her again. But the monster who made that mark is back, and he wants her returned. When the river turns into a war zone, will this marriage of protection become their greatest weapon, or the trap that destroys them both? The rain drummed against the chapel's stained glass, casting jeweled shadows across Naomi's face as she stood beside Julius Rinaldi. Her silk dress whispered against her skin with each breath, the borrowed heels pinching her toes, a minor discomfort compared to the weight of what she was about to do. The officiant's voice echoed in the vast space, competing with thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations. "Do you, Naomi Pierce, take Julius Rinaldi?" Naomi's fingers trembled slightly as she thought of Alana, safely tucked away in one of Julius's properties across town. Her sister's face floated before her eyes, young, bright, unaware of just how much danger had forced this moment. The anonymous threats of the past week had escalated from whispers to bullets through windows. "I do," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the chapel despite its softness. Julius stood beside her like a statue, his expensive suit as dark as the gathering storm outside. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes tracked every movement in the shadows of the chapel. Even here, in what should have been a moment of celebration, he was scanning for threats. The ring he slipped onto her finger was platinum, simple, elegant, and probably worth more than her entire wardrobe. His hands were warm and steady, a stark contrast to the clinical precision of the gesture. When he leaned in to kiss her cheek, his cologne wrapped around her like an expensive cage. Monroe waited by the chapel doors, his presence both reassuring and a reminder of their circumstances. His quiet voice carried easily as he detailed their security measures. "Coastal routes clear, estates on red alert, we've got eyes on all approaches." The convoy of black SUVs cut through the rain-slicked streets like a funeral procession. Naomi watched the city lights blur past, each mile taking her further from everything familiar. In the driver's seat, Monroe maintained a steady stream of updates through his earpiece, while Julius reviewed something on his tablet, the blue light casting harsh shadows across his sharp features. When they arrived at the estate, Naomi's trained eye couldn't help but catalog every detail. The house rose from the cliffside like a modern fortress, all clean lines and defensive positions disguised as architectural choices. Security cameras nestled in every corner, their presence announced by tiny red lights that winked like distant stars. "The south bedroom has been prepared for you," Julius said, his voice carefully neutral as he led her through the main hall. Naomi noted the heavy security doors, the reinforced windows, the 2 clear exit routes. Information filed away automatically after years of staying alive through observation. The bedroom itself was beautiful, she had to admit. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Atlantic, now churning dark and violent below. But it was the details that made her stomach clench. The exact brand of hair oil she preferred arranged on the vanity. The specific silk pillowcases she'd mentioned once in passing to Alana. "Someone did their homework," she murmured, running a finger along the row of hair products. "I believe in being thorough," Julius replied, standing in the doorway. His massive frame filled the space, a reminder of the power imbalance between them. "You'll find everything you need here." Everything except freedom, Naomi thought, but kept her face neutral. "Thank you." "Monroe will be down the hall if you need anything." Julius's eyes met hers, and for a moment something flickered in their depths, something that might have been regret, or perhaps just a trick of the light. "Good night, Mrs. Rinaldi." The title settled over her like a shroud as he closed the door. Naomi listened to his footsteps fade, counting them automatically. 15 steps to the stairs, then silence. She sat on the edge of the bed, its softness almost offensive in its luxury. The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime, each deep tone reverberating through the house. 10 o'clock. Outside her window, the storm continued its assault on the coast, while inside, the tiny red light of the security camera blinked steadily, marking time with mechanical precision. I will find a way out, she whispered to herself, the words barely disturbing the air. Before dawn breaks, I will find a way out. But even as she made the promise, she knew the truth. Every exit would be watched, every movement monitored. The camera's red eye blinked again, a silent reminder that in this gilded cage, she was never truly alone. She could feel the weight of the platinum ring on her finger, still warm from Julius's touch. It was both a shield and a shackle, protection for Alana, but at the cost of Naomi's freedom. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent years running from one prison only to walk willingly into another. The rain continued its relentless drumming against the windows, nature's own security system adding to the fortress's defenses. Somewhere in the house, she could hear the faint murmur of voices, probably Monroe coordinating with his security team, ensuring their newest charge remained safely contained. Naomi stood and walked to the window, watching lightning illuminate the angry sea below. In its brief flashes, she could see the patrol cars making their rounds of the property, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. The estate was a masterpiece of surveillance and security, every angle covered, every approach monitored. First light crept around the edges of the blackout curtains, painting thin gold lines across the bedroom floor. At 6:15 a.m., Naomi stirred from a fitful sleep, roused by the cry of seabirds and the rich aroma of fresh coffee wafting through her door. Her body ached from tossing and turning, sheets twisted around her legs like gentle restraints, a feeling that made her skin prickle with awareness. She patted across the plush carpet, the fibers cushioning her bare feet as she approached the door. Hesitating only a moment, she traced the cool metal of the handle with her fingertips before turning it. A silver breakfast tray waited on an antique side table, steam rising from a porcelain cup that gleamed in the soft morning light. Monroe stood beside it, his presence as immovable as the stone walls surrounding them, shoulders squared beneath his tailored jacket. "Good morning, Mrs. Rinaldi," he said, his tone professionally warm, eyes quickly scanning her face for signs of distress. "I trust you slept well?" "Well enough," Naomi replied, noting how he positioned himself, not blocking her path, but making it clear he'd track her movements. His stance was relaxed but vigilant, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. The message wasn't subtle. She could move freely, within limits, like a bird in an aviary rather than a cage, given the illusion of freedom while still contained. After breakfast, Naomi began a systematic exploration of the upper floor. She walked the corridors with measured steps, her fingers occasionally brushing against the textured wallpaper. Mentally recording the sweep of each security camera, she noticed how the tiny red lights blinked with mechanical precision. Every 30 seconds, the devices panned left to right, leaving 3-second gaps in coverage, little blind spots in the watchful eyes. The guards patrolled in 15-minute intervals, their routes overlapping with practiced precision, their expressions neutral, but eyes alert as they nodded respectfully when passing her. The balcony doors caught her attention, elegant French doors with reinforced glass that sparkled in the morning sun. When she tested one, she felt the resistance of magnetic locks, the handle giving just enough to tease before stopping firm. More walls, just prettier ones, gilded barriers designed to look like choices. By 9 a.m., she found herself in the kitchen, where Julius stood at a gleaming espresso machine. The morning light caught the silver at his temples, softening his usual severity and highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw. He worked the machine with practiced movements, those same hands that she'd seen close around a man's throat, now coaxing rich espresso into tiny cups. The rich scent of coffee filled the space between them, mingling with the faint spice of his cologne. 6 months, he said, without preamble, setting a cup before her on the marble countertop. The porcelain clinked softly against stone. "That's how long you'll need protection. We'll make public appearances, dinner parties, charity events. You'll be seen as mine." His voice dropped lower on those last words. "You'll have a direct line to Monroe." His dark eyes met hers, unblinking and intense. "And when there's a security call, you follow orders without question. No exceptions." Naomi wrapped her fingers around the warm cup but didn't drink, feeling the heat seep into her palms. She studied the rich darkness of the coffee, seeing her own reflection distorted on its surface. "I won't promise blind obedience." "No?" One eyebrow lifted slightly, his only visible reaction. "I'll earn my safety with honesty, not submission." She raised her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "You want my trust? Make it mutual. I need to understand the rules, not just follow them." Julius studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, fingers drumming once, twice against the countertop before stilling. "Trust isn't measured in words," he said finally, voice dropping to a gravel-rough murmur. "I'll know I can trust you by what you do when you're afraid. That's when people show who they really are." The morning gave way to afternoon, sunlight shifting across polished floors and highlighting the gilt frames of old paintings. Monroe appeared for what he called a basic safety orientation, carrying a small leather case tucked under one arm. His manner was gentle but thorough as he pressed a slim panic button into her palm, his calloused fingers brushing against her smooth ones. "Keep this with you always," he demonstrated the mechanism, showing how it fit discreetly into a pocket or could be worn on a chain around her neck. 3 seconds of pressure sends an alert to security. 5 seconds brings the entire response team. No matter where you are on the property, we'll reach you in under 90 seconds. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, a hint of warmth in his professional demeanor. He led her through the house with unhurried steps, pointing out reinforced panic rooms concealed behind wooden panels that looked like ordinary walls until he pressed hidden catches. Each room contained supplies, communications equipment, and defensive measures that he explained with calm efficiency. Naomi maintained a polite smile, but her heart hammered against her ribs, pulse jumping at her throat. Every safety measure felt like another bar in her cage, each security feature another reminder that danger waited beyond these walls. Danger, with her sister's name written all over it. Dinner was a silent affair at 8, served at opposite ends of a mahogany table long enough to seat 20. Crystal glassware caught the light from the chandeliers overhead, casting prismatic patterns across the crisp white tablecloth. They ate without speaking, but Naomi felt Julius watching her between bites, his dark eyes missing nothing. She caught him noting how she arranged her silverware, how she held her wine glass with practiced elegance, how she scanned the room every few minutes, gathering intelligence while she gathered sustenance, cataloging exits and entry points between sips of wine. After dinner, when the house had grown quiet and shadows pooled in corners, Naomi returned to her room and retrieved a hairpin from her vanity. The balcony doors looked simpler than they were. No visible locks, just elegant handles and clear glass that reflected her determined face back at her. She worked the pin into the seam, where she'd spotted the magnetic mechanism, feeling for the catch with practiced fingers. Seconds later, Monroe materialized in her doorway like a conjured spirit. No alarms had sounded, no lights had flashed, but here he was, looking apologetic but resolute. His shoulder rested against the doorframe in a casual pose that belied his watchful eyes. "The entire glass surface is alarmed, Mrs. Rinaldi," he explained quietly, voice pitched low, as if sharing a confidence rather than delivering a warning. "Any tampering triggers a silent alert. There are pressure sensors in the frame as well." Naomi replaced the hairpin with a graceful nod, tucking it back into her hair. "Good to know," she said, her tone matching his for politeness, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The exchange confirmed what she'd already suspected. She needed more than lockpicks and timing. She needed leverage, information, and allies. Perhaps even the very men tasked with keeping her contained. As midnight approached, Naomi sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, its intricate patterns blurring beneath her focused gaze. A small notebook lay open on her knee, pages crisp and white in the lamplight. Her hand moved swiftly across the page, sketching the floor plan from memory. Every corridor, every turn, every camera position marked with precise lines. She marked the blind spots she'd discovered with tiny X's, the places where patrol routes left momentary gaps circled in red. The clock on her nightstand ticked softly, marking seconds that felt both too fast and too slow. Downstairs, Julius stood in the kitchen with the night steward, his voice low but carrying in the quiet house. The marble countertops gleamed under the soft lights, throwing shadows across his face that deepened its natural severity. "Remove the flowers from Mrs. Rinaldi's room," he instructed, adjusting his cufflinks with a practiced motion. "The fragrance might disturb her sleep." His eyes flicked toward the ceiling, toward where he knew she would be. The steward nodded and departed silently, footsteps barely audible on the polished floor, but Naomi didn't hear this exchange. She remained focused on her map, adding detail after detail, building her understanding of the fortress that surrounded her. Her fingers moved with delicate precision, nails occasionally scraping against the paper as she traced escape routes and security weaknesses. The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the house like a somber reminder of passing time as she drew the final lines of her careful diagram, a blueprint for survival in a gilded prison. The grandfather clock struck 7:30 as Naomi descended the sweeping staircase, her hand resting lightly on Julius's arm. Her black slip dress whispered against marble steps, each movement calculated and graceful. The house staff moved like shadows, their eyes finding sudden fascination with polished floors and distant windows. No one dared look directly at them. The new Mrs. Rinaldi and the man whose name made even whispers dangerous. The museum glowed like a jewel box under the evening sky, its classical facade lit by tasteful spotlights. Inside, the fundraising dinner buzzed with old money and older art. Marble busts watched from pedestals as Naomi glided through her role, offering measured smiles and careful responses to probing questions about their whirlwind romance. "Such a lovely surprise," cooed a banker's wife, her diamonds catching the light. "No one even knew Julius was seeing anyone." "The heart has its own timeline," Naomi replied smoothly, feeling Julius's hand settle at the small of her back. Not possessive, protective. She was learning the difference. The councilman's son appeared during the silent auction, wine-brave and oblivious. He leaned too close, his cologne sharp enough to make Naomi's nose wrinkle. "I didn't catch your name earlier." Before she could respond, 3 of Julius's men materialized like smoke. They didn't touch the boy or speak a word. They simply stood, their presence a wall of quiet menace. The color drained from the young man's face, and he melted into the crowd, leaving his half-finished bid card on the table. Naomi watched him go, processing the moment's lessons. Power rippled out from Julius like waves, reshaping reality without a word spoken. But that power came with eyes everywhere, marking every person who approached, every conversation, every movement. Later, in a quiet corridor lined with Renaissance sketches, Naomi seized a private moment. "I need to see Alana," she said, keeping her voice low. "Just once, to make sure she's settled in the safe house." Julius turned to face her, his expression grave. "Not possible. Not now." "She's my sister." "And every syndicate in the city is watching our movements." His voice was gentle but immovable. "The moment you visit her, she becomes leverage. Bait. Is that what you want?" The truth hit Naomi like ice water. Her marriage hadn't just put her in a gilded cage, it had painted a target on her back. Any contact with Alana would draw that same dangerous attention to her sister. She'd thought she was protecting Alana by making this deal, but she'd underestimated how her new status would affect every move she made. The ride home was silent, broken only by the purr of the engine and the occasional crackle of the security radio. Naomi sat perfectly still, using the tinted windows as mirrors to study the museum's security patterns reflected in the glass. Camera positions, guard rotations, blind spots. She filed away every detail. Her initial despair crystallized into something harder, colder, more useful. The estate gates closed behind them at 10:15, steel bars clicking into place with mechanical precision. Naomi noticed how the perimeter lights cast shadows, how the guards changed positions, how every piece of the security puzzle fit together. She wouldn't waste time fighting the locks anymore. She would learn the system from the inside out, master it more thoroughly than the men who designed it. In her room at 11, Naomi pulled out the burner phone she'd hidden earlier. Alana would be waiting for her call. They'd arranged this timing months ago, back when they first started running. The phone connected after one ring, going straight to voicemail as planned. "Hey, sweetie," Naomi kept her voice warm and steady. "Everything's fine here, just busy with new schedules and faces. Remember what we talked about staying put? That's extra important now. 2 days, no exceptions, okay? Keep up with your studies. I love you." She ended the call and methodically erased all trace of it from the phone's memory. Kneeling by the bed, she lifted the loose floorboard she'd discovered during her first night's inspection. The hiding spot was barely large enough for the slim phone, but that made it perfect. She aligned the device with mathematical precision, making sure it sat exactly parallel to the board's edges. The house settled around her as she worked, creaking and sighing like a living thing. Somewhere below, she could hear the measured tread of security patrols, the quiet murmur of the night staff going about their duties. Every sound, every shadow, every routine was another piece of data to collect and analyze. Naomi replaced the floorboard with the same careful attention she'd given to hiding the phone. To survive in this new world of power and surveillance, she needed more than just determination. She needed to understand the cage before she could even think about escaping it, and understanding meant patience, observation, and perfect attention to detail. The grandfather clock downstairs began to strike 11, its deep notes rolling through the house. Naomi counted each chime silently, using the familiar ritual to center herself. She had made her choice when she signed the marriage contract. Now she would live with that choice and learn from it. Dawn hadn't. Broken yet when Naomi entered the private gym, the soft whir of the rowing machine cutting through the pre-morning silence. She'd chosen this early hour hoping for solitude. But Julius was already there, his broad frame silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows as he finished a set of deadlifts. Their eyes met briefly in the wall of mirrors. No words were exchanged, just a slight nod of acknowledgement before each returned to their routine. The rhythmic sound of Naomi's rowing merged with the controlled thunder of Julius's weights hitting the padded floor. Naomi watched him between sets, gathering intelligence in small details. The way he wiped down each piece of equipment with methodical precision. How he returned every weight to its exact place, adjusting them until they lined up perfectly. These weren't the actions of someone who delegated tidiness to staff. This was a man who imposed order wherever he could, as if keeping his immediate environment controlled might keep larger chaos at bay. The morning light strengthened, painting the gym in soft grays and golds. Neither broke the comfortable silence that had settled between them. It was easier this way, Naomi thought, when they didn't have to navigate the complex territory of words. By noon, they were seated at opposite ends of the dining table, reviewing the guest list for an upcoming charity gala. Naomi studied the names while Julius made notes in precise handwriting. "The Castellanos will expect prominent placement," Julius said, his pen tapping against the paper, "though their recent ventures make them complicated guests." "Put them where everyone can see them, but not hear them," Naomi suggested, surprising herself by contributing to this strange domestic scene. Table 3, perhaps, near enough to the stage to feel honored, far enough that conversations stay private. Julius's eyebrow lifted slightly. Approval, maybe, or surprise at her tactical thinking. He made the notation without comment. The day unfolded in these moments of reluctant coexistence. Naomi learned Julius's habits, his preference for the morning paper over digital news, the way he always loosened his tie 2 notches when entering the house, how he took his coffee black but his bourbon neat. The afternoon brought a harsh reminder of exactly who she'd married. One of Julius's men, a mid-level soldier with more ego than sense, made a crude remark about the new wife, within earshot of the kitchen staff. By evening, the man was sporting a freshly broken nose and had submitted a formal written apology to the entire household regarding proper respect. The message resonated through every corridor. Naomi might be a prisoner, but she was an untouchable one. At midnight, they found themselves sharing the kitchen again. Naomi prepared jasmine tea while Julius nursed a glass of bourbon, the crystal catching amber light from under cabinet fixtures. "Jasmine or peppermint?" he asked unexpectedly. "Jasmine?" she answered, lifting her cup slightly. He nodded, making a mental note. The next morning, she knew, both varieties would appear in her kitchen stores. Earlier, around 10, Naomi had discovered a small blade on the counter. Monroe's calculated carelessness at work. She'd waited until the house quieted before practicing the basic moves he'd demonstrated days before. The knife slipped, opening a shallow cut along her forearm. Within minutes, Julius appeared at her door, first aid supplies in hand. "May I?" he asked, holding up a roll of gauze. The request for permission wasn't lost on her. Naomi nodded, and he stepped inside with careful deliberation. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he cleaned and bandaged the wound, his touch clinical, but something else humming beneath the surface. The air between them grew thick with unspoken awareness. Their proximity created its own gravity. Naomi noticed the faint scent of his cologne, the controlled rhythm of his breathing, the slight roughness of his fingertips against her skin. Julius worked with precise efficiency, but his eyes flickered to hers once, dark with something neither of them was ready to name. He withdrew as soon as the bandage was secure, maintaining the careful distance they'd established. But something had shifted, a new current running under their carefully constructed routine. The storm hit just after midnight, plunging the estate into darkness. Emergency lights cast soft blue shadows through the halls as Naomi made her way to the living room, finding Julius already there with a flashlight. They ended up on opposite ends of the same couch, talking through the blackout. The darkness made it easier somehow, as if the absence of light granted permission for small truths. "Worst coffee you've ever had?" Julius asked. "Gas station in Nebraska 3 years ago. Tasted like burned rubber and regret." Naomi surprised herself by smiling at the memory. "Yours?" "Army base in Kazakhstan. The grounds were older than the sergeant brewing them. They traded these safe confessions back and forth. Favorite books? He preferred military history, she loved science fiction. Childhood pets, his German shepherd, her sister's cat. Secret talents, he could play chess blindfolded, she could pick simple locks. When the power snapped back on at 12:05, the spell broke. They blinked in the sudden brightness, awareness of their positions and roles rushing back. Their good night was charged with possibility. Nothing promised, everything implied. As Naomi climbed the stairs to her room, she could still feel the ghost of Julius's hands on her arm, still hear the low rumble of his laugh in the darkness. These were dangerous waters, she reminded herself, but she was already in deep. The autumn afternoon gleamed with deceptive peace as their convoy rolled through downtown's shopping district. At 3:40 p.m., Naomi watched the city scroll past her window from the back seat, Monroe's solid presence beside her, while Julius reviewed supply manifests on his tablet in the front passenger seat. The routine supply run had been uneventful until now, picking up specialty items, checking on affiliated businesses, maintaining the visible presence that kept their territory stable. Naomi's gaze drifted across the shop windows, reading the city's reflection like a second screen of information. Movement caught her eye, a metallic glint 2 roofs up that didn't belong. Her heart stuttered as training kicked in. Without conscious thought, she was already moving. Rifle! 10 o'clock high! The warning tore from her throat as she lunged between the seats. Her fingers found the emergency brake of the trailing SUV, muscle memory from watching Monroe's security drills taking over. She yanked hard, sending the vehicle into a controlled spin that placed it as a barrier between them and the incoming fire. The first shots crackled through the air like thunder. Bulletproof glass spiderwebbed, but held as Monroe moved with battlefield efficiency, dragging Julius behind the engine block. Julius's response was immediate and lethal. His pistol barked twice, and 2 shadows toppled from the roofline. Naomi's world narrowed to survival coordinates, distance, angles, cover. She crawled across blood-slicked asphalt, glass crunching under her palms. A fallen guard's pistol lay within reach. She snatched it up, hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Left corner, 2nd floor!" Monroe's voice cut through the chaos. Naomi pivoted, weapon raised, holding the angle he'd called out. Her finger rested beside the trigger, ready but disciplined. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes, but time stretched like taffy in a gunfight. More of Julius's men appeared from cover positions, laying down suppressive fire. The attackers broke formation, scattering into the maze of side streets and fire escapes. The echo of shots faded into sirens and shouting. By 5 o'clock, they had secured the estate. Julius's rage had been a living thing during the drive home, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, orders firing rapid fire into his phone. But the moment they cleared the garage, that fury transmuted into something else entirely. He crossed to Naomi in 3 quick strides, hands coming up to frame her face. His touch was achingly gentle as he tilted her head, checking for injuries. When he found only minor cuts from the glass and bruising from impact, his voice cracked around her name. "Naomi." She saw the shift in his eyes. The moment professional distance crumbled under the weight of what could have been lost. The attraction they'd been dancing around for days sparked like a live wire between them. Monroe coordinated the security debrief, his quiet efficiency giving them space to process. Teams reported positions, trajectory analysis, shell casing counts. Naomi provided her observation sequence 3 times, each detail precise and valuable. Julius paced the command center, piecing together the puzzle of who had dared strike so boldly. At 11, after the last report was filed and the night watch doubled, Naomi found herself outside Julius's study. The decision crystallized with each step as she crossed the threshold and closed the door behind her. No words were needed. The look they shared said everything about boundaries crossed and pretenses abandoned. She moved toward him with deliberate grace. Julius stayed perfectly still behind his desk, watching her approach with an intensity that made her skin prickle. When she reached him, the last walls between them dissolved. The first kiss was cautious, testing, asking, answering. The second threw caution aside. Julius's hands slid into her hair as she pressed closer, tasting bourbon and gunpowder in need. They ended up on the leather couch, a slow exploration of touch and trust. Neither pushed for more than this careful discovery. Shirts stayed on, hands stayed mostly proper, but the intimacy was profound. Every brush of fingers, every shared breath, declared that the game of distance was finished. They weren't pretending anymore. Time blurred in the quiet after. Naomi drifted toward sleep against Julius's shoulder, surrounded by his warmth and the faint hum of security monitors. She felt him shift slightly, draping his suit jacket over her like a shield against the night air. The last thing she registered before sleep claimed her was Julius's arm tightening protectively around her waist, his attention divided between her peaceful face and the screens that kept watch over their fortress. In that moment, in the blue glow of monitors at 2 a.m., he was both her fiercest protector and a man undone by the weight of what he now stood to lose. The night stretched on, Julius's vigil unbroken as dawn approached. His world had narrowed to this, The woman sleeping trustingly against him, the constant feed of security data, and the knowledge that everything had changed. The careful distance he'd maintained, the professional barriers he'd erected, all of it had crumbled in the face of almost losing her. Now there was only this new reality where his heart beat in time with hers, where every threat against her was a threat against his very core. Late morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm rays across Naomi's silk robe as she reached for the tea kettle. The gentle domestic moment shattered when her collar shifted, exposing the raised geometric pattern burned into her skin at the base of her throat. Julius went absolutely still. The air in the room changed, turning sharp and brittle. Where did that come from? His voice was deadly quiet, controlled in a way that spoke of violence barely contained. Naomi's hand instinctively moved to cover the mark. "A stupid teenage choice," she said, the lie sliding out smooth as glass. The truth behind that sigil was a weapon she couldn't afford to hand over, not yet. Not when it would destroy the fragile peace they'd built. Julius nodded once, accepting her words at face value. But his body language told a different story, shoulders rigid, jaw tight. He finished his coffee in silence and left the kitchen without touching her. The next 2 days stretched endless and cold. Julius maintained perfect courtesy, but gone was the tenderness from the study, the heated glances across rooms. His withdrawal cut deeper than any angry outburst could have. Naomi found herself missing his casual touches, a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing as he passed her coffee. On the second evening, restless energy drove her to the chapel just before sunset. She found Julius there, sitting in the front pew, staring at the bank of unlit votive candles. The dying light painted everything in shades of amber and shadow. He spoke without turning. "I made a promise once." His voice was rough. "To protect someone, a girl who trusted me." The pause stretched heavy with old grief. "I failed." Naomi recognized the particular weight in his words. Survivor's guilt, the kind that reshapes a person from the inside out. She moved closer, settling beside him in the pew. "The mark," she said carefully, "isn't what you think. It wasn't faith or gang loyalty that put it there, not a choice I made." Julius's hands clenched on his thighs. He nodded once, sharp and understanding. That night, the ice between them finally cracked. Naomi found him in the living room, backlit by the city lights beyond the windows. She crossed the space deliberately, climbing into his lap with slow purpose. His hands came up to steady her automatically. She rested her forehead against his, sharing breath. The moment hung suspended, charged with possibility. Then Julius's control snapped. His mouth found hers, hungry and desperate. Naomi matched his intensity, fingers curling into his shirt. They came together like a storm breaking, all the tension of the past days igniting into heat and need. They barely made it upstairs. Clothes marked a trail to his bedroom, kisses growing deeper and more demanding with each step. Julius backed her toward the bed with predatory grace, but his touch remained reverent, asking permission with each new exploration. Naomi answered with sighs and arching bodies, pulling him closer. When he finally pushed into her, the connection felt like coming home. This wasn't just sex, it was communion, each thrust and gasp weaving them tighter together. Julius worshipped her body with the dedication of a man granted salvation, while Naomi marked his skin with promises neither could voice yet. The sheets ended up thoroughly rumpled, sweat cooling on heated skin as they caught their breath. Julius pulled her close, wrapping around her like he could shield her from the world through proximity alone. They lay awake in the aftermath, shoulder to shoulder in comfortable silence. The city hummed beyond the windows, a distant lullaby of traffic and night sounds. Julius's fingers traced idle, patterns on the back of her hand, mapping the delicate bones and tendons as if memorizing her blueprint. "No one touches you," he murmured into the darkness. "Ever." The words carried the weight of an oath. Naomi said nothing, letting the promise hang in the air between them. The past was the past. Some truths could wait for daylight. For now, she curled closer into his warmth, listening to his steady heartbeat and thinking about the strange paths that had led them here. The clock on the nightstand blinked 1:10 a.m., its red numbers casting a faint glow across their entwined forms. Outside, the security lights swept regular patterns across the grounds, while inside this sanctuary they had carved out a moment of peace, fragile perhaps, but real. Julius's arm tightened around her waist, protective even in near sleep. Naomi traced her fingers over the scars on his chest, reading the history written in his skin like braille. Each mark told a story of survival, of fights won and losses endured. Now their stories were beginning to intertwine, for better or worse. The night wrapped around them like a cocoon. The world beyond the bedroom doors temporarily held at bay. In these quiet hours, between midnight and dawn, they could pretend the only truth that mattered was the one they were writing together, heartbeat by heartbeat. Moonlight filtered through the gaps in the curtains, painting silver stripes across the bed. Naomi watched the play of light and shadow, feeling Julius's breath even out beside her. There would be complications tomorrow, questions that needed answers, truths that needed telling. But for now, there was just this, shared warmth, shared breath, and the tentative peace they'd found in each other's arms. The war room's screens cast a blue glow across the polished conference table. At 6:45 p.m., Naomi sat between Julius and Monroe, reviewing security feeds, when an encrypted message pinged through their firewalls. "Sir," Monroe's voice held unusual tension, "you need to see this." A video window opened. The face that filled the screen made Naomi's blood freeze. Caleb Vespari, a man whose death had been confirmed 3 years ago, smiled at the camera with the lazy confidence of a cat watching wounded prey. His face was a masterpiece of scar tissue, one eye milky and unseeing, but his voice carried the same cultured menace she remembered from whispered warnings. "Julius," he purred, "did you think I wouldn't notice you taking what's mine?" Julius's hands curled into fists on the table. "Your empire is built on borrowed time and stolen property." Vespari leaned closer to the camera. "I'm coming to collect what belongs to me, every piece, every person." The screen went black. Julius's fist connected with it in the same moment, shattering the display. Blood dripped from his split knuckles. "Full lockdown," he ordered, voice deadly quiet. "Triple the guard on Naomi's wing. I want eyes on every shipping corridor from here to the coast." Monroe was already moving, speaking rapid instructions into his comm unit. Guards materialized in doorways, their usual discretion replaced by visible weaponry. Naomi sat very still, fighting waves of nausea. Vespari. The name threaded through her nightmares like poison silk. She remembered other girls, some younger than Alana, who vanished into his properties and never emerged. She remembered the night she earned her scar, the price of keeping her sister safe. Julius paced the length of the war room, issuing orders with lethal precision. "Check every dock worker, every warehouse manager. If anyone's loyalty feels questionable, remove them. Monroe, I want background checks redone on the entire household staff." He was preparing for war without understanding the true battlefield. Vespari didn't wage conventional fights. He collected people like chess pieces, turning their fears and secrets into weapons. Naomi retreated to her room as the house transformed around her. Armed men took up positions at every corner. Security panels blinked from green to red as additional protocols activated. At her desk, she pulled out the worn library book she and Alana had passed back and forth through countless moves and hideouts. Their own private code lived in its margins, dots and underlines that spelled out safety warnings and meeting points. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote the letter. "My fierce little sister, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. Remember that every choice I made was to keep you breathing. The life we built is yours now. The accounts, the safe houses, the networks. Use them. Stay invisible. Don't come looking for me. Don't trust anyone who claims to bring messages from me. You know our codes. Anything else is a trap. You were worth every scar and sacrifice. Keep running. Keep living. All my love. N." She sealed the letter and tucked it into the book's spine, then made her way to Monroe's office. He looked up from his security feeds, expression grave. "Could you return this to the library?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "It's overdue." Monroe's eyes flickered to the book, then back to her face. He nodded once, understanding passing between them without words. The book would never reach a library shelf. He'd keep it safe until it was needed. Rain started falling as Naomi walked to the chapel, fat drops striking the stained glass windows. The empty sanctuary felt both refuge and confessional box as she sank onto the stone steps. The truth about her scar felt like acid in her throat. Julius was throwing resources at shadows while the real monster smiled in the dark. Vespari didn't want territory or shipments. He wanted to prove that everything Julius protected could be taken away. She touched the raised pattern at her throat, the mark that branded her as Vespari's property in the eyes of the old families, the scar that could turn this tactical chess game into something far more personal. Thunder rolled across the bay, and Naomi watched lightning flash through the chapel windows. The marriage that had started as a business arrangement had grown into something real, something worth protecting. If she kept the secret, that fragile trust would shatter when Vespari revealed it himself. The grandfather clock in the main hall struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the empty corridors. Naomi stood, brushing dust from her skirt. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the chapel roof like artillery fire. She had to tell Julius the truth, about the scar, about the girls who disappeared, about why Vespari's return meant more than just rival syndicate politics. The war coming for them wasn't about territory or power. It was about ownership, about proving that even Julius Rinaldi's wife could be marked and claimed. Guards stood at attention as she walked back toward the main house, their faces grim in the security lights. The estate had transformed into an armed camp in the hours since Vespari's message, but no amount of guns could stop a man who turned secrets into weapons. Naomi's heels clicked on marble as she headed for Julius's study. Better to lance this wound now, before Vespari could use it to poison everything they'd built. The truth might cost her Julius's trust, but lies would definitely destroy it. Rain streamed down the windows, distorting the grounds into watercolor smears. Somewhere beyond those gates, a dead man was smiling, certain that his carefully planted seeds of doubt would bloom into destruction. Naomi straightened her spine and lifted her chin. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. The chapel air hung thick with incense and shadow. Naomi watched the votives flicker, their light casting trembling shapes across the stone walls. She had chosen this sacred space deliberately. Somehow the weight of confession felt right here, where even killers came to whisper their darkest truths. "Will you sit with me?" she asked Julius, her voice steady despite the thunder of her pulse. He settled beside her on the wooden pew, close but not touching. The space between them felt like a held breath. Naomi's fingers found the collar of her blouse. With deliberate slowness, she pulled the fabric aside, bearing the geometric scar that had haunted both their silences. Julius went very still. "I need to tell you how this really happened," she said. "Not the lie I gave you about teenage rebellion. The truth." She kept her eyes on the dancing flames as the story spilled out. "I was 16 when Vespari's men found us. They put us in a safe house. Me, Alana, 3 other girls. We were supposed to be inventory." The word tasted like ash. Julius's hands tightened on his knees, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "I watched how they operated. The men were superstitious. They wouldn't touch what belonged to someone more powerful, especially not what belonged to Vespari." Naomi traced the raised edges of the scar. "So I created my own protection," she described, stealing the lie from a locked cabinet, heating the broken ring over a candle flame. "I used a mirror and worked in sections. The pain," she swallowed hard. "The pain was worth it. I spread the word that Vespari had marked me himself, claimed me. The men believed it. They always believed the worst about their monsters." The flames wavered as she continued. "It gave us a perimeter, space to breathe, to plan. When we finally ran, that mark kept other predators away. No one wanted to risk touching what they thought was Vespari's property." A bitter smile touched her lips. "I've lived with the lie ever since. It bought us safety, but the price was carrying his brand." Julius hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. Now he covered his face with both hands, shoulders rigid. When he finally looked up, his eyes shone wet in the candlelight. Not with pity, but with a rage so deep it had circled back to grief. "You are," he said hoarsely, "the bravest person I have ever known." His hands trembled slightly. "I'm sorry. For every hour you carried this alone, for every time I made you lie to protect it." Naomi felt something tight in her chest begin to unwind. "You can touch it," she whispered, "if you want to." Julius hesitated, then reached out with infinite gentleness. His fingers brushed the raised pattern, and she felt the tremor that went through him. "I need to tell you something too," he said, after a long moment. His hand dropped back to his lap. "The rehab clinic, I fund. It's not just charity." Naomi waited, giving him the same space he had given her. "There was a kid, years ago, 14, maybe 15, smart, good with computers. I thought I could use those skills, keep him safe at the same time." Julius's voice roughened. "I turned him into a weapon before he was old enough to understand the cost. When it all went wrong." He drew a shaky breath. "The clinic is my penance. Too late for him, but maybe not for others." "No more lies," Naomi said softly. "Even when the truth burns?" "No more lies," Julius agreed. They sat in companionable silence as the candles burned lower. The confession had drained them both, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. Julius's head gradually tilted until it rested against her shoulder. Naomi watched his breathing even out into sleep, his face younger in repose. The hard lines of violence smoothed away, leaving only the man who funded rehab clinics to atone for past sins. The votives guttered, casting their last light across the chapel's worn stones. Past and present merged in the shadows. A teenage girl burning salvation into her own skin, a man trying to protect with the same hands that had once destroyed. Two people finding redemption in shared truth. Outside, the estate hummed with guards and guns preparing for war. But here in this sanctuary, Julius slept against Naomi's shoulder while she counted his breaths and watched the candles die. A clock somewhere struck 10, its chimes muffled by thick walls. Neither of them moved. They had earned this moment of peace, bought with painful honesty and the promise of no more lies. The last votive sputtered and went dark. Naomi remained still, supporting Julius's weight, surrounded by the scent of melted wax and old wood and shared confessions. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. Tonight was for healing. In the darkness, her hand found his, fingers interlacing. He stirred slightly but didn't wake, his grip tightening even in sleep. Naomi closed her eyes and let herself rest, truly rest for the first time since she had carved Vespari's mark into her flesh. They stayed that way as the minutes ticked past. Two wounded people who had chosen to trust again, finding shelter in each other's truth. The chapel held their vigil in sacred silence, witness to the moment when masks finally fell away and real healing began. The war room hummed with focused energy at 9 a.m. Sharp morning light cut across smartboards where analysts worked in silent efficiency, pinning red strings between photos and documents. Naomi stood beside Julius, watching the pattern emerge with growing dread. "Show me again," Julius said, his voice tight. The lead analyst, Chen, tapped through financial records that scrolled across the main screen. The charity's accountant, Marcus Weber, moved funds through 17 shell companies. Chen highlighted the trail in yellow. Each transaction was designed to implicate Ms. Pierce, but when we traced it back, he pointed to a familiar geometric symbol hidden in the routing numbers. "Vespari," Naomi breathed. The mark on her throat seemed to burn. "The debt was manufactured," Julius confirmed, knuckles white on the edge of the desk. "A trap, laid piece by piece." Monroe entered with a leather ledger, its spine cracked with age. "Found this in your father's old office safe, boss. You need to see it." Julius opened the book carefully. The pages were brittle, filled with his father's cramped handwriting. He stopped suddenly, color draining from his face. "What is it?" Naomi asked. "A list." Julius's voice was hollow. "Girls to be protected after a raid went wrong, 15 years ago." His finger traced down the page to a familiar name written in faded ink. "You're here, you and Alana both." Naomi felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "My father made a promise to shield certain families after Vespari retaliated against civilians." Julius closed the book with careful control. "I inherited his empire, his vendettas, and his broken vows." "Vespari knew," Monroe said quietly. "He engineered this whole thing to ignite a blood feud. The marriage, the debt, the threats. It's all connected to that raid." They watched understanding transform Julius's grief into lethal purpose. His eyes went winter cold as he straightened, every movement precise. "Chen, I want Vespari's supply lines mapped within the hour. Track every shell company, every front business." He turned to Monroe. "Move Alana to the lake house. Change her check-in time. Push it 2 hours off schedule. No more patterns they can predict." "And Weber?" Monroe asked. "The accountant is mine." Julius's voice could have frozen flame. "Have a team ready at dawn. We'll take his office first, then work our way through the network." Naomi watched the transformation with clear eyes. This was the man who made rivals disappear, who held the city's underground in an iron grip. The blade she had married was fully unsheathed, and she chose him again without hesitation. "I know Weber's routine," she said. "He takes the same route to work every morning, stops at the same coffee shop." Her voice was steady. "I can help plan the intercept." Julius studied her face. "You understand what helping means. What I'll do to him. I understand exactly who you are." Naomi met his gaze. "I'm choosing this. Choosing you." Something fierce and tender flashed in Julius's eyes. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. The war room cleared gradually as teams deployed to gather intelligence. By 11 p.m., only Naomi and Julius remained, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the study floor amid scattered papers and city maps. Julius winced as he reached for a grease pencil, the movement pulling at his old shoulder wound. Naomi's hand found the knotted muscle automatically, applying gentle pressure. "Here," she said, tracing a route in bold strokes. "Weber's car will be vulnerable at this intersection. 3 minutes between traffic cameras, clean sight lines for your people." Julius leaned into her touch, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Good. We'll have teams here and here." He marked 2 more points. "Clean extraction, no witnesses." They worked in comfortable silence, plotting trajectories and timing. The grease pencil scratched across paper as they refined each detail. Tomorrow would bring violence, but tonight was for preparation, for the quiet certainty of 2 people who had chosen their path together. Naomi's hand remained steady on Julius's shoulder as the clock crept toward midnight. The touch grounded them both, his strength tempered by her presence, her resolve strengthened by his protection. On the wall, digital displays counted down the hours until dawn. Maps and photos covered every surface, a web of connections leading to their target. The air hummed with potential energy, like the moment before lightning strikes. Julius checked his watch. 11:30 p.m. "We should rest," he said quietly. But neither moved immediately. They sat together on the study floor, surrounded by the architecture of tomorrow's retribution. Naomi's fingers worked small circles into Julius's shoulder, easing the old wound that weather and stress always aggravated. The city sprawled across the map before them, marked with their planning. Each line represented a step toward justice, or vengeance, or both. They had built this plan together, balancing Julius's tactical precision with Naomi's intimate knowledge of their target's habits. Time ticked forward. Dawn approached with its promise of action, but for now, they allowed themselves this moment of calm preparation, drawing strength from each other's presence as they prepared to meet whatever tomorrow would bring. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 6 as evening settled over the estate. Naomi stood at the study window, watching guards patrol the grounds with measured steps. 2 days had passed since Julius's teams had torn through Vespari's storage facilities, leaving wreckage and warning in their wake. The quiet felt false, like held breath before a scream. Monroe's footsteps thundered down the hallway, wrong for his usual measured pace. He burst through the study door, face ashen. "The lake house is compromised." Julius rose from his desk, papers forgotten. "Alana?" One of the nurses turned. Monroe's hands clenched. "Left her post an hour ago. We found this carved into the chapel steps." He held out his phone. The image showed crude letters gouged into marble. "Bring Naomi to Pier 17. Midnight, or the girl bleeds out by dawn." Naomi's world narrowed to a pinpoint of ice. "Show me the nurse's background check." "Already running it again." Monroe pulled up personnel files. "Everything was clean, 7 years at Mount Sinai, perfect references." "Because Vespari placed her years ago," Julius cut in. "Playing the long game." The war room transformed into a hive of controlled urgency. Julius spread tactical maps across smartboards, while Monroe coordinated teams through encrypted channels. They designed a precise extraction: decoy vehicles approaching from 3 angles, drones monitoring thermal signatures, snipers positioned to create overlapping kill zones. Naomi watched them work, saw the elegant brutality of their planning, and understood with stark clarity that it would fail. "Vespari expects surgical strikes," she said quietly. "He'll have counters ready. The more precise we are, the more he'll make us pay for it." Julius paused, studying her face. "What are you thinking?" But Naomi had already retreated behind her eyes, remembering the dress she'd worn the last time Vespari saw her. Pale blue cotton, torn at the hem from running. She still had it, folded in tissue paper at the back of her closet like a battle flag. The clock ticked toward 11. While Julius and Monroe refined approach vectors, Naomi slipped upstairs. She changed quickly, muscle memory guiding her hands as she packed a slim kit. Burner phone, folding blade, compact flashlight. The dress settled over her skin like old armor. In Julius's study, she left a note in careful script. "I'm not betraying you. I'm buying us a cleaner angle. Find me." The estate's blind spots had become familiar friends. Naomi ghosted through shadows between camera sweeps, using the guard rotation patterns she'd memorized during sleepless nights. The perimeter gate's service entrance had a 3-second delay in its magnetic lock. Just enough time to slip through if you knew the rhythm. At 11:22 p.m., Julius discovered her empty room. Standing in the doorway, he allowed himself one moment of raw hurt before it hardened into resolve. His voice carried through the halls like winter thunder as he mobilized every asset, every favor, every scrap of influence in his considerable reach. Naomi moved through back alleys and service corridors, the city's arteries she'd mapped during years of running. The burner phone stayed silent in her pocket. She knew Julius would try to track her, knew he'd understand too late why she'd gone alone. The river wind carried diesel fumes and brine as she approached Pier 17. Sodium lamps cast sickly yellow pools between long shadows. The dress fluttered around her knees. A girl's dress, chosen to remind Vespari of easier prey. 11:58 p.m. Naomi stepped into the harsh light, her hair lifted in the wind as a figure emerged from the darkness. Vespari looked older, grayer, but his smile held the same predatory edge she remembered. He dragged Alana forward, knife pressed to her throat. "Right on time," he purred, still so obedient when properly motivated. Alana's eyes were wide with fear and fury. A bruise darkened her cheek, but her spine stayed straight, so much steel in such a young frame. Naomi felt fierce pride beneath her terror. "Let her go," Naomi said quietly. "You want me, the one who got away, the one who marked herself with your sign and turned it against you." She lifted her chin, making sure the old scar caught the light. Vespari's gaze locked onto it, exactly as she'd planned. His focus shifted just enough. 30 precious seconds bought with the same trick that had saved her all those years ago. 30 seconds while she held his attention with the brand that had once made her untouchable. 30 seconds while his knife hand stayed steady at Alana's throat. 30 seconds while distant shadows shifted with careful purpose, Julius's people taking position, following her trail like she knew they would. Naomi kept her hands raised, kept Vespari's eyes on her face, on the scar that had become a weapon pointed at his pride. She had learned young that men like him were slaves to their own mythology. She just had to hold his focus, keep playing the role of frightened prey while better hunters closed the trap. The wind pulled at her dress, at her hair. She counted heartbeats, counted breaths, kept Vespari talking, kept him fixed on the symbol he thought she'd stolen. Everything hinged on these next moments, on her ability to be exactly what he expected, while being something else entirely. Behind her, the pier creaked with phantom weight. Above, metal scraped softly against metal. But Vespari heard nothing, saw nothing but the girl who had dared to claim his mark, the girl who had turned his own superstitions against him, the girl who was no longer running. The pier's sodium lights died at exactly 12:01 a.m., plunging the waterfront into darkness. In that first breath of blackness, Naomi heard the whisper of boats cutting through water, the soft scrape of tactical gear against concrete. Vespari's grip on Alana tightened. "Quite the cavalry your new husband brings." Suppressed gunfire cracked the night. The first shot caught Julius in the shoulder as he emerged from shadow, but he didn't break stride. His eyes found Naomi's through the chaos, steady and certain. Monroe's training surfaced in Naomi's muscles like muscle memory. She shifted left, drawing Vespari's attention with the movement. The knife she'd concealed slid into her palm. One step, then another, a dance Monroe had drilled into her for hours. Vespari tracked her like she knew he would, his own blade leaving Alana's throat by inches. "Still trying to run?" he taunted. "No," Naomi said softly. "Not anymore." She drove the knife up under his ribs at precisely the angle Monroe had taught her, using Vespari's own forward motion to sink the blade deep. His eyes widened in shock, the look of a man who'd forgotten his prey could bite back. Alana twisted free, scrambling toward the shipping containers where Monroe's team had set up cover. Pride bloomed fierce in Naomi's chest. Her sister remembered their old escape protocols, moved like they'd practiced. The pier erupted into close-quarters combat, the air filled with cordite and sweat, the metallic ring of blade on blade. River water slapped against the pilings, carrying the copper tang of blood. Julius's men moved with practiced efficiency, clearing threats with mechanical precision. Julius reached them in 3 long strides, good arm wrapping around both sisters while his injured side leaked dark stains onto his jacket. He pushed them behind a stack of crates, shielding them with his body as bullets sparked off metal nearby. "Status?" he growled into his comm. "Perimeter secure," Monroe's voice crackled back. "Police bands active but redirected, 5 minutes clear." Vespari lay on the concrete, blood pooling black in the darkness. His smile hadn't faded. It stretched wider, showing teeth stained red. "You've learned new tricks, little girl." Naomi met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch. This wasn't like before, when she'd had to look away to survive. This time she watched the light leave his eyes, watched the monster become merely meat. Sirens wailed in the distance, too late as always. Julius's team moved with practiced efficiency, erasing evidence and clearing shell casings. Monroe materialized beside them, medical kit in hand. "Boss, we need to move. Your shoulder." "In a minute," Julius cut him off. His face had gone pale from blood loss, but his arm stayed firm around Naomi's waist. Alana hadn't let go of Naomi's hand since reaching cover. Her grip was fierce enough to grind bones, but Naomi welcomed the pain. It anchored her to now, to survival, to the family they'd fought to keep. The night smelled of gunpowder and brine. Flashing lights painted the clouds red and blue, still far enough away to pose no threat. Below them, the river lapped at the pier's supports with the patience of an ancient thing, finally satisfied with its offering of blood. At 12:24 a.m., Julius turned Naomi to face him, his forehead pressed against hers, breath warm on her skin. "You're mine," he said, voice rough with pain and something deeper. "Not to cage, to keep alive." Naomi closed her eyes, letting his words sink into her bones. The distinction mattered. Possession versus protection, cage versus shield. She felt Alana's hand squeeze tighter, felt Julius's heart hammering against her palm where it rested on his chest. They stayed frozen in that moment while activity swirled around them. Monroe coordinating cleanup, teams sweeping for stragglers, boats cutting silent paths through the dark water. The sirens grew closer, then faded as police followed carefully planned false trails. Julius swayed slightly, blood loss finally taking its toll. Monroe appeared at his side, medical supplies ready. "Boss, we need to move, now." Naomi kept her grip on Alana's hand as they helped Julius to the waiting car. Her sister's knuckles were white against hers, matching the bloodless pressure of her own grip. Neither of them was ready to let go yet. The river continued its endless conversation with the shore, washing away the night's violence with each dark wave. Whatever monster still lurked in its depths would wait for another tide. This hunt, at least, was finished. Monroe drove them smoothly through back routes while a medic worked on Julius's shoulder in the rear seat. Alana curled against Naomi's side, finally allowing herself to tremble. Naomi stroked her hair, the way she had when they were younger, and the shadows seemed full of teeth. "It's done," she whispered, for herself as much as her sister. "It's really done." Julius reached across with his good hand, fingers finding hers in the darkness. His touch was gentle but certain. A promise, not a cage. Through the windshield, the city's lights blurred into stars, each one marking another step away from the pier and its bloody business. The car carried them home through streets growing quiet with late hour. Naomi watched Julius's reflection in the window, saw how he kept his eyes on her, even through the pain. She thought about scars, the one on her throat that had bought their first escape, the fresh one Julius would carry in his shoulder from tonight's rescue. Some marks were chosen, some were earned. All of them told stories of survival. Morning sun spilled across the estate lawn at 10 a.m., painting golden stripes through the study windows. Julius sat at his desk, right arm secured in a black sling, reviewing documents with the intensity of a man dismantling an empire, piece by piece. The corrupt charity accountant, Marcus Chen, slouched in the leather chair across from him, his manicured facade crumbling under the weight of inevitability. "Sign here," Julius said, sliding another witness, protection form, across the polished wood. "Your testimony ensures Vespari's remaining accounts freeze by noon." Chen's hand trembled as he scrawled his signature. Sweat darkened the collar of his once crisp shirt. "They'll still find me." "No," Julius stated with quiet certainty. "They won't." Monroe stood by the door, his presence a reminder that choices had consequences. The stack of witness protection packets grew steadily smaller as morning stretched toward noon. Each signature represented another nail in the coffin of Vespari's legacy. In the adjacent room, Naomi sat straight-backed before a camera, her voice steady as she detailed years of Vespari's operation. The formal recording would seal the investigation, turning her survival into evidence. Alana curled on the leather couch nearby, clutching a steaming mug of tea, watching her sister transform pain into power. "The first safe house was on Maple Street," Naomi recounted, hands folded in her lap. "I remember the yellow curtains, how they never quite closed properly. That's where I learned about the brand." The detective taking her statement maintained professional composure, but his knuckles whitened around his pen. Naomi's testimony was surgical, precise, the kind that would hold up in court while bringing down walls. By late afternoon, the war room had shifted from tactical maps to legal documents. Julius's network, built for protection rather than persecution, adapted seamlessly to this new kind of battle. Where bullets had failed, paperwork would succeed. At 6 p.m., Naomi and Julius stood alone in the chapel. Sunset painted the stained glass in deep crimsons and golds, turning the space into a jewel box of light. Julius held his father's old ledger, pages yellowed with age and weighted with guilt. "Ready?" he asked, finding the page with her name. Naomi nodded, striking a match. The flame caught quickly, eating through decades-old paper. They watched the ash drift like delicate gray snow, carrying away broken promises and inherited debts. "Some ghosts need fire," Naomi murmured, watching the last fragments dissolve. Later that evening, she gathered her belongings from the south bedroom. There was something profound in the simplicity of it. No grand gesture, just the quiet certainty of coming home. Her dresses hung beside his suits. Her jewelry box found space on his dresser, and her toothbrush settled next to his like it had always belonged there. She tucked her slippers under their shared bed, the possessive pronoun feeling natural now. The room transformed with her presence, lotions on the nightstand, a novel dog-eared on her side of the bed, the subtle floral notes of her shampoo mixing with his cologne. When they made love that night, it was different, unhurried, tender, free from the weight of secrets. Julius traced the scar on her throat with gentle fingers, his touch a promise rather than a claim. Naomi mapped the fresh bandage on his shoulder, marking how he'd bled for her choice to run, how he'd understood it wasn't betrayal, but strategy. The next afternoon, sunlight warmed the private medical suite where Julius's trusted tattoo artist set up her equipment. At 3 p.m., he asked the question that had been building since the pier. "Do you want to reclaim it?" His eyes met hers in the mirror. "Make it yours?" Naomi studied her reflection, fingers brushing the raised lines that had bought her freedom at such cost. "Yes," she decided. "A crown of thorns, but with a lily woven through it." The artist sketched with quiet efficiency, creating a design that honored both survival and transformation. The needle's hum filled the room as old scars disappeared beneath new art. Julius held her hand through each line, his grip steady and sure. Hours passed as ink replaced memory. The crown took shape, thorns sharp but beautiful, the lily's petals soft against their edges. It was power chosen rather than forced, beauty grown from darkness. When the artist finished at 7:40 p.m., carefully wrapping the fresh tattoo, Julius knelt beside the chair. His lips brushed the newly healed lines with reverence. "I'll carry the fury of what you endured," he whispered against her skin, "as long as I draw breath." Naomi curved her hand around his jaw, lifting his face to hers. "I don't need a sanctuary anymore," she replied softly, the words carrying the weight of hard-won truth. "I became one, and now..." Her fingers traced his cheekbone, gentle but certain. "Now I choose to be a queen." The setting sun painted them in amber light, turning the medical suite into something sacred. The old scar was gone, transformed into art that told a different story. Not of survival alone, but of survival transformed into triumph. Lantern light danced across the rose garden, casting warm shadows through cream-colored petals. The late summer evening wrapped around the estate like silk, perfumed with blooms and possibility. At 7 sharp, string music drifted between the carefully pruned hedges, where tables draped in ivory linen formed intimate circles beneath strands of twinkling lights. This was the reception they'd never planned, but somehow needed. Not for show or tradition, but for marking how far they'd come. Monroe, usually stoic and watchful, led Alana in a surprisingly graceful waltz, her burgundy dress swirling as she laughed at whatever quiet joke he'd shared. The sight made Naomi's throat tight. Her sister's joy was the purest measure of their victory. Near the dessert table, old Mr. Chen, who'd tended these gardens for 30 years, slipped extra slices of wedding cake to younger staff members with conspiratorial winks. The cake itself was a masterpiece of simplicity. 3 tiers of vanilla bean and fresh cream, decorated with sugar roses that matched the living ones surrounding them. City officials who'd once viewed the Rinaldi name with wary respect now raised careful toasts, their words chosen to acknowledge both the power shift and their relief at its direction. The police commissioner spoke of community partnerships, while the district attorney praised urban renewal initiatives, diplomatic code for how Julius had redirected his empire's strength. Over the past weeks, Julius had systematically transformed questionable ventures into legitimate enterprises. Shipping routes now carried legal cargo tracked by cutting-edge logistics software. Empty warehouses became tech incubators, funding local startups. The transition happened so smoothly that even his rivals had to admire the precision. There were no weak spots to exploit, no loose threads to pull. Naomi's own transformation of purpose had taken equally concrete form. The foundation she'd established already funded 3 neighborhood legal clinics and a network of women's advocacy programs. Her board consisted entirely of survivors, women who understood viscerally how safety and power intertwined. They reviewed grant applications with the sharp eyes of those who'd learned to spot shadows, funding initiatives that built real escape routes instead of temporary shelters. Julius stood as twilight deepened, commanding attention without raising his voice. The garden fell silent, faces turned expectant in the golden lantern glow. His hand found Naomi's shoulder, steady and warm. 3 months ago, he began, voice still carrying the roughness of old wounds and newer battles. I thought I understood power. A pause, heavy with meaning. I was wrong. Heads tilted, glasses stilled mid-sip. Julius rarely admitted error, and never publicly. Power isn't about what you can take or control, he continued, looking down at Naomi with naked tenderness. It's about what you choose to protect and how you learn to do it right. His fingers tightened slightly on her shoulder. My wife taught me that love doesn't make you weak. It makes you precise. It turns blind force into something with purpose. Naomi reached up, covering his hand with hers, feeling the subtle tremor in his fingers that only she would recognize. She took my pride, Julius said softly, but his voice carried to every corner of the garden, and rebuilt it into conviction. She showed me that true strength grows in the light, not the shadows. The gathered crowd raised their glasses in response, but Naomi barely noticed. She was too focused on the way Julius's thumb traced circles on her skin, grounding them both. As midnight approached, guests began to drift away in 2s and 3s. Monroe escorted Alana to her newly renovated wing of the estate, where she'd insisted on staying close while attending university nearby. The gardener supervised staff clearing tables with the same attention he gave to pruning his beloved roses. By 12:30, Naomi and Julius were alone in their bedroom, the night air drifting through open windows carrying the last notes of music and laughter. She sat cross-legged on their bed while he loosened his tie, both unwinding into the private version of themselves they shared only here. What will we teach them? Naomi asked softly, running her fingers over the silk coverlet. Our children, when they come. Julius sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. That fear is useful but not trustworthy, he answered after a moment. That isolation feels like safety until you learn what real protection means. That love isn't weakness, Naomi added, leaning into him, even when it terrifies you. Especially then. Julius turned to press his lips to her temple. We'll teach them that family isn't just blood. It's choice and trust and showing up when it matters. They spoke quietly of new rhythms replacing old defensive patterns. The nightly check-in calls that had marked Naomi's first weeks of captivity would give way to family dinners where Alana could share university stories, and Monroe could pretend not to smile at her enthusiasm. Julius's pre-dawn workout ritual would shift to shared mornings twice a week when they could spar and strengthen each other under the rising sun. Dawn found them in the chapel, where it had all begun. Morning light spilled through stained glass, painting the floor in jewel tones. Naomi reached out to touch a votive holder, cool and smooth under her steady fingers. No tremors now, no fear sweat or racing pulse. Just peace, hard-won and carefully tended. Julius stood behind her, one palm coming to rest over her throat where the lily tattoo bloomed against her skin. The touch was gentle, reverent, marking not possession, but partnership. Together they walked out into the waking garden. Beyond the estate's gates, the city stirred to life, traffic building like distant waves. This was their domain now, not through force but through choice, a territory marked not by fear, but by the careful balance of sharp edges and soft centers of power used to protect rather than possess.